If you believe shortages only start once store shelves are completely bare, chances are you've already missed the warning signs. Many everyday items haven't vanished from grocery stores at all. Instead, what's disappeared is the ease of buying without thinking. On the surface, everything still seems available. Yet somehow, it doesn't feel as dependable or guaranteed as it used to. This isn't a story about the collapse of society or the end of the world. It's about 10 everyday items that are slowly, almost unnoticed, slipping into shortage, each for a different reason and each in its own way. And the key thing is this: if you notice the signs early enough, you still have options. So let's get started. 10. Beef. There's an uncomfortable reality most people don't like to acknowledge. Shortages don't start the day something disappears from the store. They begin much earlier, right when buying it stops feeling automatic. Beef has now reached that point. You can still find it in the cooler. The lights are on. There are no warning labels or empty spaces. Yet the ease of tossing it into your cart without hesitation is gone. And that subtle shift is often the most telling sign of all. For generations, beef represented consistency. You went to the grocery store, and it was simply there. Meals were planned around it without a second thought. No spreadsheets, no mental math, no hesitation. That sense of certainty started to crack when Texas, the largest beef-producing state in the country, endured prolonged drought conditions. The ripple effects were immediate and severe. Hay became scarce, water for cattle was limited, and feed prices surged. Ranchers weren't cutting back because people stopped wanting beef. They were downsizing because keeping full herds had become impossible. And when herd sizes shrink, beef doesn't vanish overnight. Instead, it shifts into a new phase, one where reliability slowly erodes. What makes this change unsettling is how quietly it unfolds. There's no rush on the aisles, no frantic headlines, no bare shelves. Instead, packages get smaller. Familiar cuts become less common. Prices creep upward just slowly enough that you tell yourself it's probably a temporary fluctuation. Until one day, you experience a moment many people now recognize. You're standing at the meat counter, you check the price. And you think, maybe I'll skip it this time. That single pause is the moment beef stops being a default choice. For older adults especially, this isn't only about what's for dinner. It's about a disruption to routine. Meals that once anchored the day now require consideration. Habits built over decades begin to shift, quietly and almost reluctantly. When something as deeply ingrained as beef no longer feels easy or automatic, it points to something larger than food alone. It reflects a tightening sense of everyday security. That's why beef represents one of the clearest shortages, not because it has disappeared from supermarkets, but because it has faded from the comfort of effortless decision-making. History suggests that once a foundational item enters this stage, it rarely snaps back to its old role anytime soon. True shortages don't announce themselves loudly. They murmur in the background until, one day, you realize your behavior has already changed. In times of strain, the first thing to vanish isn't the product. It's the feeling of worry-free shopping. 9. Fresh oranges. Fresh oranges are easy to take for granted. Most of us think of them as a seasonal product. One harvest ends, another begins. If one year is rough, the assumption is that the next planting cycle will fix it. What's happening in Florida no longer follows that pattern. This isn't about one bad season or a temporary dip in output. It's the result of damage that has been stacking up for years, layer after layer, creating a problem that can't be quickly undone. Powerful hurricanes have repeatedly hit Florida's core, orange-growing regions, uprooting trees, flooding soil, and wiping out groves that took decades to grow and mature. But the storms are only the most visible part of the story. The more serious threat has been unfolding quietly in the background. Citrus greening. This disease has spread across Florida for years, and once a tree is infected, the decline begins. Harvests shrink, oranges grow smaller, flavor weakens, and eventually the tree dies off altogether. The key issue is that orange trees don't behave like fast-growing crops. You can't simply replant and expect a full recovery the following season. Restoring production takes years of patience, investment, and care, assuming recovery is still even possible. Because of that, the shortage of fresh oranges doesn't show up as empty displays overnight. Instead, it reveals itself in subtle ways. The oranges are still available, but their size varies unpredictably. The sweetness isn't as consistent as it once was. Prices creep upward, not dramatically, but just enough that most shoppers quietly accept the increase. Then, almost without noticing, something changes. You realize you're no longer reaching for oranges with the same confidence you had a few years ago. Not because you've stopped liking them, but because they no longer feel dependable. That's why fresh oranges rank among the more troubling shortages, not due to how much production fell this year, but because the underlying system that supports their growth has been deeply compromised. When the foundation is damaged, recovery stops being a matter of time and becomes a question of whether recovery is possible at all. And that's why fresh oranges appear here on the list, to remind us that some losses can't be fixed with just one good growing season. Think back to the last time you bought oranges simply because you wanted them, without quietly factoring in weather, quality, or price. 8. Champagne and wine. Some items don't show up in the grocery cart every week, but they're woven into life's most meaningful moments. Champagne and wine fall into that category. They're brought out for anniversaries, milestone dinners, and occasions people want to honor properly. Because they aren't everyday purchases, it's easy to assume that a shortage wouldn't really matter. In reality, the impact only becomes clear at the exact moment you need them. After the pandemic, demand for wine and champagne surged. People were eager to make up for lost time, to celebrate again, to restore a sense of normalcy that had been interrupted for years. At the same time, wine-growing regions around the world were being hit repeatedly by extreme weather. California endured long droughts and intense heat. France's Champagne region faced damaging hailstorms and untimely late frosts. Production didn't collapse all at once. Instead, it declined gradually over several seasons, thinning supply year after year. This kind of shortage doesn't cause panic. Store shelves still hold bottles. But when you walk in looking for a familiar label for a special occasion, the difference becomes noticeable. The brands you recognize are missing. The selection feels narrower. Prices are clearly higher than you remember. There's a moment many people now experience. You pick up a bottle, hesitate, and then put it back, quietly thinking, maybe another time. That hesitation is the point when champagne stops being a natural expression of joy and turns into something that requires second thoughts. Wine and champagne aren't scarce because production has stopped altogether. They're becoming scarce because society has begun to tighten, even around moments that were once reserved for celebration. When symbols of abundance become harder to reach, it signals a deeper shift in how people think and spend. Life continues. Stores stay open. But people begin to hold back, even on the small pleasures they once assumed would always be there. 7. Lettuce and leafy greens. Lettuce was once one of the easiest items to buy. It was inexpensive, widely available, and almost guaranteed to be sitting on the shelf whenever you needed it. For many people, it symbolized health, simplicity, and, most of all, peace of mind. Vegetables were just assumed to be there. That's what makes the growing unpredictability around lettuce so unsettling. Nearly half of all lettuce eaten in the United States comes from California. As the state's weather patterns have grown more erratic, farming has become harder to plan. Long heat waves are now followed by unusual rainfall, disrupting planting schedules and damaging crops. At the same time, plant diseases have spread more widely, causing large-scale die-offs and cutting deeply into harvests. This isn't the kind of shortage that grabs headlines. It's a slow weakening of supply that's easy to miss at first. Lettuce hasn't disappeared in the dramatic way people typically imagine shortages. There are no empty aisles or frantic buying. Instead, shoppers encounter an uneasy pattern. Shelves are full one week, bare the next, and then stocked again, with different quality and a higher price. That inconsistency makes it hard to know what normal even means anymore. Lettuce may not be the centerpiece of a meal, but it plays an important supporting role. When it becomes unreliable, people start making quiet adjustments, changing recipes, skipping fresh greens altogether, or settling for fewer options. None of this sparks panic. But over time, these small compromises begin to wear down the sense of everyday stability. As one viewer put it simply, the cheapest and most familiar items are often the first to slip away. That's why lettuce matters. It shows that security doesn't disappear through one dramatic event, but through repeated minor disruptions that slowly add up. 6. Canned foods and beverages. In 2022, many Americans noticed something strange, though at the time, few would have called it a crisis. Stores weren't empty. There was no rush to stock up. Supermarkets stayed brightly lit, and canned goods were neatly lined up as usual. And yet, something felt off. People searching for the specific canned foods and beverages they routinely bought found themselves visiting multiple stores, only to come up empty-handed. The issue wasn't that food had disappeared. It was that the right food, the familiar kind, was suddenly hard to find. The cause wasn't obvious to most shoppers. It wasn't about crops or demand, but about overlooked components of the system. Aluminum for cans, and industrial CO2 used to seal and preserve canned foods and beverages. As energy prices surged, fertilizer plants in both the United States and Europe cut production or shut down entirely, disrupting the supply of CO2. At the same time, aluminum producers were squeezed by soaring electricity costs and fragile global supply chains. The canning system didn't fail outright, it contracted. And when systems shrink, the first thing to vanish isn't volume, but familiarity. Brands people had relied on for years quietly disappeared. Favorite flavors stopped showing up. Items that once landed in carts without a second thought were suddenly missing. In their place came unfamiliar labels, short-term replacements, or options no one had planned to buy. The shelves still appeared stocked, but shoppers lingered longer. They read labels more closely. And for the first time, they wondered whether the same product would even be there next week. This is the most subtle and dangerous form of shortage because it doesn't trigger alarm. Instead, it slowly wears down everyday routines. People start buying extras when something finally appears. They accept substitutions they never would have chosen before. Or they quietly remove a familiar item from their meals altogether. Each choice seems minor. But repeated over time, they quietly drain the sense of normalcy from daily life, without anyone ever labeling it a problem. As one person put it perfectly, "I don't see a shortage of canned food. I just can't buy what I'm used to anymore." And that's the real signal of a supply chain under pressure. Not when shelves are empty, but when certainty slips away unnoticed. 5. Palm oil. Almost no one walks into a store thinking, "I'm here to buy palm oil." Most people barely notice it at all. It's rarely talked about, almost never chosen directly, and doesn't spark any emotional reaction. And that's exactly why problems with palm oil ripple so widely when they occur. Palm oil isn't something most people cook with on its own. Instead, it quietly sits underneath thousands of everyday products, processed foods, snack items, frozen dinners, instant noodles, and even non-food goods you'd never associate with an ingredient list. When global palm oil supplies tighten due to export limits or production strain in major producing countries, the shortage doesn't announce itself as missing palm oil. Instead, it shows up as subtle changes across everything else. Shelves don't go bare, but packaging looks different. Ingredients are adjusted. Some familiar products quietly vanish, while others stay but cost more or no longer taste or feel the way you remember. There's no sign posted explaining what's happening. And yet, you start to sense that something is off. Items you've bought for years suddenly feel altered, even if you can't immediately say why. What makes palm oil particularly disruptive is the domino effect it creates. When a foundational ingredient becomes unstable, dozens of industries are forced to adapt at the same time. Each change on its own seems minor, but together they create a low-level unease that's difficult to identify. There's no dramatic breaking point, no single moment of crisis. Just a growing feeling that daily life isn't flowing quite as smoothly as it used to. Palm oil doesn't disappear with noise or warning. It fades by quietly knocking many other systems out of sync, long before most people realize where the disruption began. 4. Bread and wheat products. Bread is one of the easiest foods to overlook because it almost never vanishes. It's there in the morning, every store carries it, and that constant presence makes it feel immune to disruption. So when wheat-related issues arise, most people don't immediately think bread will be affected. But bread doesn't signal trouble the way people expect. It doesn't disappear. It speaks through price. Russia and Ukraine together supply roughly 30% of the world's exported wheat. When that flow is disrupted, the effect doesn't show up as empty shelves. Instead, it moves quietly through the cost structure. First, the price of flour climbs. Then transportation becomes more expensive. Energy costs rise as well. And throughout all of this, bread remains available. Yet each time you pick up the same loaf, there's a subtle change. It costs a little more than it did the last time. The shift is gradual, slow enough to avoid panic. There are no rushes to stock up and no warning signs posted. But with wheat-based products, steady price increases are how the system signals strain. The first items to disappear are often the most affordable bread options, the ones with the smallest margins. They're replaced by higher-priced alternatives or smaller packages, nudging shoppers to adjust their routines without much notice. What makes this significant is that bread isn't a luxury item. It's a cornerstone of daily meals. When the cost of bread rises consistently, the pressure doesn't come from a single purchase. It builds through repetition. Week after week, month after month, people keep buying bread, but they start trimming spending elsewhere. And that's when the impact spreads beyond the loaf itself. 3. Corn. Corn almost never comes up when people talk about shortages. When concerns about food arise, attention usually goes to meat, bread, or fresh produce. Corn rarely makes the list. It feels permanently available, cheap, plentiful, and woven so deeply into daily life that it barely registers as something that could ever become a problem. And that assumption is exactly what masks how important corn really is. Corn isn't just the corn you see on a plate or in a can. It sits at the base of a massive system most people never think about. It feeds livestock, which means it indirectly supports meat, dairy, and eggs. It's turned into syrups, sugars, and starches, and ends up in hundreds of processed foods. You might not eat corn today, but there's a strong chance you'll eat something that was grown with it, fed by it, or made from it. When corn harvests are disrupted, whether by extreme weather, drought, or mounting production pressures, the effects don't appear on the corn aisle right away. Instead, they ripple outward. Animal feed becomes more expensive. Production costs rise across multiple industries. Products quietly shrink, formulas are adjusted, and some items vanish without explanation. Shoppers don't see a clear corn shortage. What they experience instead is a growing sense that things are less predictable, less stable than they used to be. Corn doesn't create panic. It creates imbalance. Everything still seems available, but the system no longer runs as smoothly. Small changes pile up, nudging people to alter their habits without fully understanding what's driving the shift. One person summed it up simply: "I don't really eat corn, but everything feels more expensive and different." 2. Sunflower oil. In many kitchens, sunflower oil was never a topic of discussion. It wasn't special or controversial. It was just there, a familiar, everyday choice that required no thought. When the bottle was empty, you bought another one. Simple. That very normality is what caused many people to miss how vulnerable sunflower oil really is when global systems begin to shift. A large share of the world's sunflower oil comes from Ukraine and Russia. When the war began, the supply chain didn't collapse overnight, but it lost its steady rhythm. The oil still appeared on shelves, just not consistently. Prices would spike without warning. Sometimes the bottles disappeared altogether. Other times, shoppers returned to find their usual brand gone, replaced by unfamiliar options they never intended to use. What makes sunflower oil feel less threatening at first is the belief that it's easily substituted. If it's unavailable, you'll just grab another oil. But when several cooking oils come under pressure at the same time, switching isn't so simple anymore. Flavors change. Cooking behavior shifts. Kitchen routines quietly adjust, step by step. There's no panic, no clear crisis. Just a growing sense that everyday tasks don't flow as effortlessly as they once did. One candid comment captured it perfectly: "I can't remember the last time I bought cooking oil without checking the price." That sentence says everything. Sunflower oil hasn't vanished in the dramatic sense. What's missing is the ease of a decision that used to happen without thought. And when something as basic as cooking oil becomes unpredictable, it exposes just how fragile the everyday conveniences we rely on really are. 1. Eggs. Eggs were once the simplest purchase you could make. Affordable, easy to cook, easy to eat, and almost always sitting in the fridge. For many households, eggs weren't just another food item, they were the backup plan. When nothing else made sense, eggs were enough. Because of that, almost no one imagined eggs could ever become a serious concern. But eggs don't enter shortage loudly. Shelves are rarely completely bare. Instead, instability shows up in uncomfortable and confusing ways. One week the price seems reasonable, the next, it jumps sharply. Then it drops a little, only to rise again shortly after. Some stores limit how many cartons you can buy. Others stock different sizes, different grades, or eggs that simply don't feel the same as before. Shoppers don't panic. But something shifts. They lose confidence. There isn't a single cause behind this. Poultry disease, rising feed costs, higher energy prices, and fragile transportation systems all add pressure. Each factor alone seems manageable. Together, they turn eggs into one of the most unpredictable items in the store. And the problem is this: eggs don't have a true replacement. When eggs become unstable, entire meal routines are forced to change along with them. For older adults especially, eggs are a reliable source of protein, easy to digest, simple to prepare, and easy to portion. When eggs lose their predictability, the impact goes beyond the price of a carton. It's the loss of a safe, familiar option in daily life. You can still buy eggs, but you no longer buy them with the same peace of mind. As one person put it, "I'm not worried about eggs disappearing. I'm worried about not knowing what they'll cost next time." That sentence captures the heart of the issue. Eggs aren't scarce because they vanish. They're scarce because they no longer hold the stable role they once did. And when one of the cheapest, most familiar foods becomes uncertain, it's often a sign that pressure has spread deep into everyday life. If even the simplest staple no longer feels reliable, what can you still count on? The 10 items you've just seen aren't disappearing all at once. What they share is something quieter and more important. They're no longer as certain as they used to be. Real shortages don't announce themselves loudly. They arrive through small changes, repeated over time, until everyday habits are quietly forced to adapt. This video isn't meant to create fear. It's meant to help you notice early signals that are easy to overlook. Because when you recognize change early, you still have choices.